Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Welcome. Our forums are scheduled for most Sundays at noon, and they are free and open to the public, and we encourage you to attend. Our mission is to nourish the mind and the spirit and serve social justice. And now I am going to introduce Eric Hartman, a longtime member of our forum committee, who will introduce today's speaker. Eric?
Thank you, Bonnie. Lately, we've had a series of forums in which we've addressed issues of criminal justice reform, problems posed by the American practice of mass incarceration. So today's topic will fit right into that sequence. Our specific topic today concerns self-help of prison inmates pursuing legal grievances behind bars. And we have a perfect guide for addressing that topic today. Dr. Terri LeClercq, a professor of legal writing, who has made something of a breakthrough in this field recently, pioneering the idea of what I've called, bear with the pun, a novel approach to inmate grievance writing, literally in the form of a graphic novel that she's created that instructs inmates in effective legal writing. Dr. LeClercq holds a PhD in American literature from UT Austin, where she was on the faculty in both English and law. In that capacity, she did great missionary work, bringing news of the English language to the heathen in the law school student body. I feel as though I can say that, having gone through that experience myself in years past. Her missionary work has extended beyond that. She's contributed to the prisoner advocacy work of the Texas Civil Rights Project and has received honors and recognitions too numerous to mention. I think I'm going to get out of the way and let her address you directly. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Terri LeClercq.
This is a book that I spent 10 years on. You'd be amazed, wouldn't you, to know that it takes 10 years to write a comic book. But if you are an English teacher, you don't know the law, and you don't know how to draw, it does take quite a bit of time to get all of that together. So what I created was not a law article, not a book, but rather a comic book, which I learned was called a graphic novel as I was doing this. I learned that it's written in dramatic style so that it's speaker after speaker. I didn't know any of that before I started writing this book, which is why it took me 10 years, and I don't recommend anyone else do it. But I'm very happy to have done it, very happy that Senator Whitmire helped me get it into the prison system, very happy that Texas Inmate Family Association has been helping me get this to the inmates who need it, because boy, do they need it. You may wonder why a little lady English teacher who is in retirement is spending her time working with criminal justice issues, and especially with inmates, and it is that my daughter and I were arrested in Fort Benning, Georgia, for protesting the School of the Americas within a legitimate Army base. You're familiar with it. 464 of us were arrested. 16 of those people, nuns, priests, social workers, were sentenced to 6 months in federal penitentiaries for walking onto an open Army base. Their letters, their postcards stunned me. I guess I'm a part of the American public that just doesn't know about jails and prisons. I didn't even know the difference between a jail and a prison. I certainly didn't know the difference between a federal and a state prison, even though I was walking the halls of the law school. When I read about the treatment of these nuns and priests in our federal prisons, I couldn't believe it. And I went to different faculty members. I'm really lucky I had a faculty hallway of criminal lawyers, and I went to them and said, "Can you believe what she said? Do you know what's happening?" And to a person they said, "Yeah, if you think that's bad in the federal pen, you should try it in the state pen." Well, I didn't want to try it in the state pen. I didn't want anyone to try any of the, it was unbelievable. So I tried, because I'm an academic, I tried writing a law review article to show up how bad all of this was, and nobody would read it, not even my mom. So I had to switch that. If my great information and my indignation isn't going to affect lawyers or professors, who could it affect? And that's when I geared it to inmates, because I figured as much trouble as I had understanding the law, American inmates have an average reading ability of 5th grade. It took me 10 years to figure out what Congress said, and I have a PhD, so I figured I would try to gear it down. And I did. This is 5th grade reading material. It is a comic in the sense that it follows the story of an attorney going in and teaching inmates about how to write grievances. But then at the back, there's a checklist. Do this, do that, put your ducks in a row, so that if they need to get outside of the prison system about grievances, they can be heard in court. Because in 1996, Senator Dole, I'm sad to say, introduced something called the Prison Litigation Reform Act. The only thing that makes sense in that at all is prison. It wasn't a reform. It sent us back almost into medieval time, took money away from the attorneys who could help inmates, and it came up with a series of draconian steps that inmates have to satisfy before they can even get to a court. The goal on Dole's part was so that it would empty the courts of unnecessary, frivolous lawsuits. And it certainly did that. Within 2 years, the number of cases that went through this process successfully and even could be heard in a court dropped down to almost 10% of what it had before the Prison Litigation Reform Act. Everybody's concerned about it. No one can do anything about it. It's the law. And the courts have upheld almost every bit of it. An interesting piece of this is that about a year after the Prison Litigation Reform Act whammed all the inmates, the federal judge for the first time in D.C. was reading the law and trying to apply it to a case before him. And he couldn't believe the new law. He had his clerks go research it and found out that the 3 examples, the 3 anecdotes that Bob Dole used on the floor to get this bill to pass as a footnote in a tax bill, those 3 examples were absolutely false. They were erroneous. They were out of it. For instance, he said, here's a case of somebody clogging up the system because he doesn't like crunchy peanut butter. That would be horrible, wouldn't it? However, when the clerk looked it up, he found out that cell block had been on lockdown for 2 weeks, and all they were served at lunch and at supper were peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And this guy is deathly allergic to peanuts. So when he appealed through the process and finally got to the courts, it wasn't frivolous. It was a matter of life and death. And yet that is the kind of anecdote that was turned around and used against the prisoners. So we have it. We have to live with it. At least looking at this book, having different people know about the steps that they can use to be heard in the court is a step, but it's certainly only a step. I'd like to briefly talk about the front end of the criminal justice system, what happens on the inside and the back side, and then ask you for questions, because I don't think you can believe it until you've been there. What's happening on the front end right now? We have 12 million American citizens admitted every year into an American jail. 12 million. That number is staggering, and it'll go away because statistics don't stick with us. But you should know that in the United States of America, 1 in 100 of our citizens is within the criminal justice system. 1 in 100. They're awaiting trial, they're in trial, they're on probation, they're in prison, they're on parole, or they're in a diversion program. In Texas, according to Scott Henson, who writes Grits for Texas, Grits for Breakfast, 1 in 27 adult Texans is in that system. It's just amazing to me. Sometimes when I talk to groups, I say, do any of you know anyone in prison? No. They say, really? My dentist, the secretary of my church, and 2 of my cousins are in prison. So maybe I'm using their statistic. I don't know. But we have so many laws now that we're going to, everybody's going to do something. Nationwide, let's see, it's an estimated lifetime cost for maintaining a Texas prisoner for life, more than $2 million. And so there becomes an interesting moral rub here. What if we do get rid of capital punishment? Which, of course, let's do that. But what if we do get rid of capital punishment? The number of people now being sentenced life without parole, LWOP, is increasing, and yet we'll be spending $2 million per person, our taxpayer dollars, and our moral sensibilities on these people. Are we cheered up yet? No. So what happens on the inside, and why did I write this book? What happens on the inside? Well, first of all, we fry a lot of them, right? We're the leading executioners in the United States. Last year we fried 9 of them. We also fry them not just in executions, but in heat. And maybe you are beginning to read stories now that Texas prisons are not air-conditioned. 2 or 3 of the units are. Think about our Texas heat. At night, these men are lying on metal trays with a thin mattress, and at night their cells can be over 120 degrees. Yeah. And so last year, I think 14 Texas inmates died of heat. We baked them like Christmas cookies. All right. We have 116 units, 2 closed last year. I go to towns in Texas that are prison units. They have a name like Palestine, but there's no there there. There's a grocery store and a gas station, and it's just Texas prison units. And we sold these communities on the idea of full employment. If you let us put your prison here, we'll employ you. That certainly didn't work. And at $23,000 to $25,000 starting, anybody in those communities who can get to the oil fields or whatever is gone. How do we change that? Some of them are their own zip code. Some of them, all of them actually, are counted. The people in those prisons are counted for redistricting purposes, for voting. They can't vote. Right. And as soon as that redistricting's over, they're forgotten again. It's not like somebody's going to go in and ask them how they're feeling about the voting. Okay, medical dental is medieval. I won't get into the gross stories, but that is happening in our prison systems on our tax dollars, and I think something needs to change. We need to do something about it. Civil commitment. Have any of you heard of civil commitment? When I heard about it, I did not believe it. If you're committed for a crime and the judge jury gives you 20 years or 50 years or whatever, and you complete your flat time and you walk out to the door of the prison and start to go out, a committee can decide that you are a future danger, and they can pick you up and take you to another prison indefinitely. And the Supreme Court has agreed that this is all right because you're a future danger and they want to protect society, and you would be getting therapeutic help so that you could finally come back. 2 years ago, there was a big explosion in the state bar. They discovered that one judge had committed all of them, and he's the one who gives them their yearly review, and he's never once let one out. State bar finally stepped in, invited the judge to go elsewhere. We now have rotating judges there, and perhaps there's going to be some therapy. There was not even any therapy going on, so it would have been really hard to get out. And imagine that, if that were your father getting ready to get out, he's done his flat time, only to disappear into civil commitment forever. So those are the kinds of things that are going on in the prison. On the backside, what do we have? Parole differs from state to state, so we're juggling apples and oranges here. The legislature determines almost all of the release information, time. A couple of years ago, they came up with yet a new parole thing and made it retroactive and totally messed up the system. Most of the inmates have no idea when they're going to get out now because of the new ones. There was a new 2014 law that adds years to the review possibility. Let's say you're in prison for 20 years. At 10 years, you are eligible for parole. When you come up, they say no. That's a word they know very well. It used to be that the next year you'd have a parole review and a parole review. For many crimes now, the minimum number of years before you're reviewed again is 5. because they could. How this is supposed to make somebody want to do better, I'm not really sure. When they get out, as you probably know, they're not allowed public housing. They need a place to live. They're not allowed food stamps. They're hungry. They can't associate with known criminals. Who did they know before they went in? Now, luckily, some of them are in unluckily, some of them are in so long, their friends have all moved on. But still, if they can't live in public housing, they can't get food supplies, where would they go? And some of these sentences are now so long that the mothers and fathers or dad, the aunts and uncles have dispersed, and they have no one. But that's the reality of reentry. So you will not be surprised at the recidivism. In Texas, so many jobs are barred for felons. And here's the craziest example. In prison, you can be taught barbering skills, how to cut hair, and the guys love that. They passed a law that if you're a felon, you can't be a barber. Yeah. 1 in 13 black adults can't vote because of their criminal records. I can't even imagine that. In Texas, once you're off paper, once you're off parole, you are allowed to vote, but that varies so wildly from state to state. In Florida, and there are lawsuits about this, in Florida, if you've ever been in jail or prison, you can never vote in Florida. Yeah. All right. Let's see. The other thing I want to complain about is the parole system. In the parole system, and we have friends who are on parole. They can't live anywhere anyway, so they're out. They have to take a bus in for a weekly meeting. They have to pay the parole officer. They have to pay their child support. If they're late for a meeting, it's a technical violation and back they go. If they show up at a parole office and that officer is out investigating someone else, that visit doesn't count. They have to leave their job to go all the way over to that parole officer so they can lose their job because they're on parole trying to get a job. There's one case in Jasper, Texas. I hope you're listening, Jasper. A parole officer decided, a friend of ours had gotten out of prison, wrote an email to his lawyer and to me saying he was going to meet his parole officer on Tuesday. He went to the meeting and she was acting sort of strange, but he didn't know how people acted out of prison. A knock on the door, sheriff's deputies came in, picked him up and took him to jail. And he was screaming, why? And she said, because she used a computer. And he said, my crime didn't involve a computer and my parole listing doesn't talk about computers. She said, because I said so. He was in jail. He lost the job he had. He lost the car he had been able to get. His daughter had to take time off from work to fight for this. I think he was in jail for 45 days before the judge had time to say, oh, yeah, you're released. Yeah. So the beginning of this is a misery. The inside of this is really miserable, and oddly, the outside of the criminal justice system is a problem too. So what can we do about it? Because we can. You're in here, you're out there. There is something we can do, and the first thing is to hold our officials, officers accountable. We have a race going on right now in Austin, Texas for DA and for sheriff. We need to find out what they think about the criminal justice system. They are the criminal justice system. What is their position on this? How do they feel about diversion before people have to go to jail? In many of the cities around the United States now, they're taking a look at what we call poverty jail. People are being put in jail because they're too poor to pay for the repairs that will allow them to get the sticker for their car, so they get put in jail, which costs them. And if they can't pay their way out of jail, they've lost their job. I call that a cycle of poverty, don't you? And I don't know whether you read this. I get all the fun mail. But just recently in South Carolina, a woman had a stomach operation of some kind. She had just gotten out. Her family was going to take her home. Instead, the sheriff's deputies picked her up and took her to jail, where she had open stitches and stuff. They refused to accept her medicine from her family. She was sick all night long, throwing up, perhaps from the anesthesia, I don't know. She dehydrated and died the next morning. Why did they pick her up? She had unpaid court fees.
Yeah, unpaid court fees can kill you. So we ask our officials, what do you want to do about that? And the answer in a lot of cities is they are now giving out warrants, they're now giving court dates rather than taking people to the jail where they lose their job and continue that cycle. I would like to hope that that's true in Austin. I'd like to see it expanded in Austin. What else can we do? We can support the work of our advocacy groups that are already there. Austin has some great advocacy groups. For instance, the Texas Civil Rights Project, close to my heart, my heroes. Texas Justice League, new one woman is just out there barreling, trying to have justice. The Texas ACLU, Texas Cure, C-U-R-E, collects money to buy little plastic fans to send into the indigents in the prisons. And those little fans are treasures within there. The Texas Jail Project, again, one woman, Diane Clay, noticed that nobody's in charge of Texas jails. Texas jail standards basically doesn't meet. Any sheriff can do whatever he wants in the jail. So she is a coalition going now to investigate what's going on and try to tell the public about it. Texas Inmate Family Association, TIFA, holds meetings all around the state trying to help people understand what's going on with their loved ones and trying to help them with the parole process. Good luck. Texas Criminal Justice Coalition, great lobbyist in the legislature all the time trying to make changes. Truth be told, women psychologists going into women's prisons, changing their attitude about themselves and victimization. They're fabulous programs here in Austin. Lots of indigent groups, lots of veteran groups. Houston has a radio show called Pacifica Radio, and on Friday nights from 9 to 11, it's the prison show. It is so fun. It is so good. There's an hour of experts talking, and then they open the mics for people to call in and talk to their loved one. If you heard it one time, you would be hooked. Sometimes somebody will call in from Minnesota. George, we've got the wheat in. We really wish you were here to help us plow it out. And another person will call in and say, this is for Louise and Ramsey. Here's your son. Come here, Junior. And you'll hear this little voice. Daddy, come home. But they always need help because they're Pacifica. They run just on our dollars. The Innocence Projects in the different colleges. Inside Books here in Austin, and I know this congregation is doing a lot to help them. You're providing money for mailing, which is an amazing problem, and collecting books. If you have dictionaries, thesaurus, Spanish books, I will be happy to take them right over to Inside Books if you can't get there. And there's something called Ban the Box Initiative. Anyone ever heard of that? Ban the Box. On an application sheet, usually on the left-hand corner, there's a box that says, have you ever committed a felony? Have you ever been in jail? And you have to answer it truthfully, right? You click it. So many organizations just toss them because they don't have to interview those people because they were felons. So banning the box at least allows those people who are applying with job skills and interest in this topic to be interviewed. And in the interview, they can tell them that they're felons. But at least they have that opportunity, and it's a step. And I think that's a big step forward. Okay. I've given you some front-end problems. Given you some, I can spend the day telling you about sad stories on the inside. Told you about some of the problems on the far end and some areas where this congregation might want to get involved in helping locally. Yes?
Are you ready for questions?
I certainly am.
Okay. Would you raise your hands high and I'll call on you? Allison Dieter. Allison?
I just wanted to remind you about some other groups.
Oh, yes, please do.
Campaign to End the Death Penalty, and that's nationwide, I believe. And there's a very active group here in Austin, Texas Moratorium Network, and we work with the legislature. And then Houston, the Abolition Movement, TAM, I think. And there's another group here also.
Great. That's great. The more, the merrier, I say. I've worked with Sister Helen. She
Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty.
Right. She wrote the introduction to my book, and I love Sister Helen. And I think that she and Dead Man Walking is actually finally making an impact. You can start with something that finally rolls enough that people are hearing about it and thinking about it. And given the number of exonerations through these innocence projects, even people who want to fry them are having to step back and say, well, maybe we shouldn't fry them yet because maybe they're innocent. Right. So that's a great addition to the list. Thank you.
Okay. Raise your hands high so I can see you. We have a question from Luther Elmore.
Yes, you said that the convicted felons cannot have access to food stamps and public housing. Is that as long as they're on paper, or how long does that last?
That's a good question. I bet it's as long as they're on paper, but I'm not the lawyer. That's off the top of my head, right? But obviously, that's when they need it, right? Yeah.
We have a question from Douglas Bauer.
Thank you for interesting discussion. Did you say you spent time in prison?
No,
okay.
no. The 16 of the people who had marched in with us spent their time in prison. That was close enough for me.
Okay.
But I did. My daughter, 16-year-old daughter, and I did get arrested and really well searched.
Okay, I was just curious if you share some anecdotes of that. So.
No, my husband keeps trying to pull me out of situations where I do get put in prison. I have to depend on him.
Okay.
And everything I've learned here, it's not really a destination spot.
Right. Thank you.
We have a question from Jim Bryce. Jim?
Thank you very much. When I was in law school, I got interested in this area 50 years ago with the National Council on Crime and Delinquency. We saw a lot of this coming. My question is, it appears that the public and a lot of our officials don't get it. That is, they don't understand that this is counterproductive, that indeed there must be a better way to deal with issues in society other than the criminal law in these lock-em-ups. What ideas do you have to change the mindset that every time there's a problem, creates another criminal law, and then creates a justice system and a prison system that deals harshly with people rather than trying to help them?
I think you have your answers in your questions, but you're right. What can we do? I did mention the early diversion where instead of going to jail, people are given tickets and then allowed to continue working so they don't have to go to jail. I think that's a big step forward. How do you change the mentality, for instance, of a state that is punitive, that wants to injure people? I don't know. Personal stories, I have plenty of personal stories. A personal story presented right. There's a new TV show that I haven't seen, Catch a Murder. What is it? How to Get Away with Murder. And that has changed more people's minds than anything I can say. When I'm talking to, I just talked last week, I was really fortunate, got to talk to a graduate group of social workers, graduate social workers at UT, and all the kids had seen that, adults, had seen that show, and they were more up on it and more willing to change the system than they had been before they saw the show. So TV, I keep waiting for a new Pete Seeger to come along with his great song that we can all sing in the shower about mass incarceration or the prison industrial complex that will stick with us. Because these statistics, things like 1 in 100, people don't really care. We need something that touches the heartstring, and I guess it's one sympathetic story told again and again. But I am amazed at what legislators don't know. Totally off the subject. Did you read today where a legislature actually believed that women could not get pregnant when they're raped unless they wanted to? Yeah, stuff like that. It's really hard to bring knowledge into a world that doesn't want it. But I think if we could just find that Pete Seeger with his guitar, any of you musicians, let's get together and work on that one.
We have a question from Jack Getman. I believe you're a law professor, aren't you? Also, you are. Would you stand, please?
Terri, when you talk about your book club and what the impact that it's had on you,
On me?
And how it's developed.
Okay. In one weak moment, when I was speaking on the prison show through Pacifica Radio, I said, in response to a lot of inmate letters I get, I don't want a pen pal. I'm busy. But if you read a book and want to talk to an English professor about that book, I will write you back. I am now getting between 100 and 300 letters a month, which takes quite a bit of my retired time. But it is so fascinating. I get book reports, Little Bunny Foo-Foo to Kierkegaard. And the Little Bunny Foo-Foo ones are so touching. And then the knight went up the mountain, and then there was a lion, but then he thought of a way to get away from the lion, and then... Yep. And I'm sure if you have children, you heard a lot of movie reviews like that, too. But it's so exciting to me. I can write back, oh, I'm so happy you read about that, and that the guy used his magic sword to get away. I'll bet you have a magic sword in your life. What is it that you use to get away from evil? I am so happy that you read that book. Why don't you also read some? I have to look them up on Amazon because I'm not that big on Bunny Foo-Foo. But by doing that, they open up. Not about their former crime. I don't want to know that, and I don't want to know how tall they are or what their grandmother said to them. But they have provided so much to my life. I have to read their book report. I have to go online and see what that book was about or something else in that genre. Keeps me on my toes, to put it mildly. And some of these people are so unbelievably intelligent and well-read. And we are wasting their lives, leaving them in prison for 40 years. In many countries, the maximum number of years you can have is 20. I'm writing to people at 40 and 50, and then these life without parole sentences. We are wasting their lives. They have paid their dues. They have paid. And it is time to let them go and get on with their lives. And I wouldn't know that if I weren't reading all of these letters from all of these people talking about Kierkegaard.
I'm Becky Siebens. I'm curious about the book that you produced. How is it primarily? Is it generally useful for federal or state?
Yes.
Any state? And
yes.
How are you distributing it?
Yes, that was hard because a part of the Prison Litigation Reform Act says that you have to exhaust your administrative remedies. It took me 2 years to figure out what that was. I'm not kidding. What on earth does that mean? It means that you have to follow the rules of your jail or your prison before you can go outside. So I use Texas as an example, but always say in there, you have to follow the rules, the federal rules or your state rules. Interestingly enough, I think it's Montana, has a jail that has an 11-step process to exhaust your administrative remedies before you're allowed to write to a court. 11 steps. That's a little coercive, don't you think? Yeah. But no, this book, and the back of it has the Prison Litigation Reform Act, the Constitution, the amendments, a bit of case law. I had to have a lot of attorneys help me on that so that it's applied throughout. But that's a good question. Thank you.
And how can you get hold of it and help distribute it?
Well, that's a beautiful question. I self-published this so that it wouldn't cost very much, which means that no trees are dead, but it also means I don't have a lot of books. You can send it in to the prison system if you have the prison's address and number. But you can't yourself buy this book and send it in. As you probably know, you can't send anything into a prison. Some prisons won't even allow letters. You have to write postcards. So you can't send it in, but you can buy it, and they will send it in. In Texas, it's real quickly, in Texas, I had help with this book from the Texas Department of Criminal Justice grievance writers. They gave me some suggestions. They reminded me that it isn't cafeteria there, it's chow hall. They helped me overcome some things that would have been embarrassing. When I published this book, I thanked them heartily. And when I tried to send it in, I don't know if you know Brada Spivey here in town, the plaintiff attorney. He bought enough copies of this to send in for free to each of the units. And TDC banned it. Yes, banned the book. Yeah. And it's only through Senator Whitmire's intervention that we were able to get this book into the prison system at all. But I haven't had any trouble in California and Minnesota and North Carolina and Florida. It just goes in.
I read, I think early last year, there was a commission that some part of the Texas government that's investigating commonly accepted forensic methods that have been in use for the past most of the past century, I think, and especially DNA testing. They're questioning the accuracy of accepted methods, and I can't remember what it's called, but
called junk science.
Yeah, but I don't remember what the commission is called in Texas. I was wondering if you'd heard of anything like that.
There are a lot of commissions, depending on which piece of science. For instance, the National Arson Commission, legal whatever, has now said that almost all of the cases where in Texas we had experts looking at what started fires and arsons, those are probably all wrong. Bite marks now has been discredited by the forensic scientist. There's a commission that says we should ban the use of bite mark evidence in trials. Another interesting problem is witness identification. They're now finding out that the statistics are so bad on witness identification that 2 of the Texas Supreme Court justices are saying they don't want to see it as a part of the argument. So now what we're going to use, I don't know, but this is called junk science, and there are people in prison for life based on the evidence of junk science.
I have a question. We have a number of universities in this state who offer degree programs, I think, including master's degrees in criminal justice. And what is your assessment of these programs, and are they turning out people who then are in any kind of position to try to implement some of the reforms that are needed? Is there a connection at all that is beneficial between the academic institutions? Are the prisons at all receptive to consultation, et cetera?
There is no light shining in the prison system, so let's just move that one to one side. I'm familiar with 2 of the criminal justice programs here in Texas. I will say this, there's a very strong bias in the criminal justice programs toward prosecution. And so that's always a concern to me. There's a great, she just retired, but there's a great professor at Texas State University in the criminal justice who's written a series of 5 books explaining to these students that there are 2 sides to the story. So although I'm really happy with the proliferation and I wish everybody would go into criminal justice, I'd like to make sure that there's a balance. All of us need a balance. My brother was a policeman. He actually was in the prison system looking at grievances and stuff. I've heard his side of it. I understand his side of it. I understand, just like Sister Helen, that there's a victim side to this also. But I would like to make sure that as these come about, they're balanced. Now, there is something else, which is the law schools have the innocence programs. The legislature has funded 5 law schools in the state of Texas so that their clinics can investigate claims of pure innocence. That is a godsend. Almost every one of the exonerations you hear about where people aren't tried on Friday have come about because of these innocence projects that are funded through the state. So let's hope that we get more of those, that the legislature will fund more, and that more students will be able to process through the system, because that is a great way to change what's happening, change the flow of criminal justice.
Thank you. This is really wonderful, or sad and wonderful. So what part do you feel that for-profit prisons is playing in this problem?
I think they should be illegal. I believe there's no accountability. The stories and letters I get from for-profit prisons are exactly as you would assume they would be. Instead of the state of Texas spending $1.85 per day on inmates, the private prisons can come in and say, we'll do it better and cheaper, and so they'll do it for $1.10 a day. Where do you think that money went? Food, medical, It's so medieval a system and so corrupt that I don't even know how to talk about it. I think that Bernie Sanders' idea was really great. First day in office, get rid of them. I'm not talking about Bernie Sanders. I'm talking about his idea. I wish that every state and feds would say the same thing. We have given away our ability to control what happens to our own citizens when we say, here for profit, go for it and help us with our taxes.
Thank you. I'm interested in the question of possible cooperation on some of these issues between prisoners for whom we're talking about their living conditions and the correctional officers for whom we're talking about their working conditions, especially when it comes to things like the unbearable heat in some of these unair-conditioned units. Have you seen any of that happening, and do you think it's feasible?
A miracle happened last year. The Texas Guard Union joined the lawsuit from Texas Civil Rights Project against heat in the prisons because they're there too. And the guards are saying, help, we're melting also. And then the other way that the prison guards and inmates have a common cause is in the number of guards per unit per hall. We don't pay them anything. We treat them horribly, unbelievably horribly, the guards. And then we don't have enough of them. So how would you feel if you were a guard in a unit of 125 and you're supposed to have 6 guards in the hall and there's only you? How happy are you and how safe are you? And how does your wife feel about your job? Wouldn't you like to live long enough to go home and see your children? So they have common cause on many issues with the inmates. It's problematic. They have to go through their union or whatever. They cannot criticize their own employer. But it makes sense that if you have happy guards, you're going to have happier inmates.
Well, actually, 2 questions. One, back to the profit motive with the privatization of the penal system. That is with the projected cost savings. Has that proven to be the case or not?
Oh, I don't have any statistics on that. I would assume that we're saving tax dollars because it's so much less to have the prisons. On the other hand, look at the lawsuits. Today's newspaper also had a big article on how cities are crumbling because the lawsuits against police that are being successful are actually killing their budget. I would imagine that lawsuits created through the mistreatment of inmates in private institutions would be killing us also, but I actually don't know.
Well, thank you. In addition to that if you said when your book was published, then it passed me by. And therefore, my question is, has this been out there long enough for you to have any data on whether this is being able to be used effectively by inmates to help them with their cause?
Thank you for that good question. I don't have any data. I know how many books I've sold, but I do have a lot of response from the inmates, and it really it's one of the best days when I get a letter that says, "Dear Dr. LeClercq, for the first time in 14 years, I have a successful grievance. Thank you so much." Yes. And they share the book. Someone will say, of course, by the way, it breaks a prison rule for inmates to share books with each other. Yeah, but they do. They share this book. And so somebody will write to me and say, so-and-so gave me a copy of your book, and I was able to use it. Also, it's helpful for people on the outside who have loved ones inside. They can read this and then go coach their loved one. Say, this really doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry this happened. Really happened. I'm sorry your roommate stinks, but that's not one of the things in the book. Stinking roommates. And so they're able to keep the frivolous ones out of the system. And I'm really sorry that the guards or officials are not happy about this book, which they're not, because they haven't read it, of course. But half of this book says, don't write a frivolous grievance. Don't write one maliciously where you just want to get back at the official. Kumbaya. Meditate. But rather, if you really have a problem, look in the back of the book. then you should write one. You should do it within a time limit. You should do it correctly. That would keep so many of the frivolous ones out, and actually that is happening. The number of frivolous ones is dropping, certainly not all because of me, but by dropping those, the people who are actually reading it, Unit Grievance Inspector, UGIs, they're able to focus more on what is really wrong in those prisons. And I will say one more thing about that. The Texas legislature, last legislative session, we were all asking for independent oversight of Texas prisons. Please consider that term, independent oversight of Texas prisons. That means that there would be a committee not appointed by TDC that would go in and do spot checks and follow up on grievances. TDC told us in the meeting, don't worry about that. There is a legislative committee here, the Criminal Justice Investigative Committee, and they'll do it. We promise we'll pay attention. They had to admit last year, 1 year after, they've never met. The Texas Legislative Criminal Justice Committee has never met. When we asked them why they hadn't met, they said, oh, it's not in the budget. And if we had a committee, I'd pay my own gas to get there.
Follow up about prison guards. I've heard a rumor, with respect maybe only to California, I don't know, that the guards themselves, the union of the guards constitutes as it were, conspiracy to increase the number of prisoners in the prison system. That's it.
Well, we all protect our own. That's certainly right. I always wonder who benefits from having so many prisoners, and the answer is a whole lot of people, including the prison guards. And they did as much as they could to obstruct the class action lawsuit that has finally taken over in California. You're right.
As Bernie Sanders and other Democratic candidates frequently point out, the U.S. currently has the largest prison population in the world. Not just largest per person, but largest absolute population. There have to be other better ways of doing prison than the U.S. does. Have you looked into European models for handling and taking care of prisoners?
I have. It's complicated, as everybody says. The head warden from both Norway and from Sweden have been in Texas talking about their system. They have a great system. You commit a crime, you go to prison, but you go out in the daytime to work, and you come back and you have an apartment that has a refrigerator and a stove, and then you go back out the next day to work. To a person, everybody listening that way, get out of here, because they have fewer population. They have a less diverse population. They don't have gangs. The drug problem isn't the same problem because they've legalized half of the drugs that we consider illegal. So it's really very difficult. I've looked at the French system. Hannah barred the door. Their prisons are still the same ones you read about in the Three Musketeers. Remember those dark, dank things with water dripping? They still have those prisons, so I'm not sure we want to go in that direction. But there has to be a better way, and there are a lot of very smart people working on this question. The problem is the very smart people working on it don't seem to be able to make much of an impact on the people who are making the decisions. 2 years ago, Ted Cruz said, we have too many people in prison, we've got to get smart on crime. Today he says, I was kidding, I'm not going to let out rapists and murderers, which has nothing to do with the subject. But by pulling that in, it's a political football, isn't it? Cory Booker in Washington is doing everything he can to create a coalition. I think there is some public will now. More people are talking about this finally. I think they're going to move the situation from here to there. I wish that the people who are really working on this could really make an effect. But unfortunately, it's just people like us picking up the phone and calling our legislative aide and saying, I care about people who are in prison, and I want you to vote that way because I vote. And I think that's the only way we're going to get through. Just keep the pressure on Congress.
I'm wondering if you could cite a few more instances where grievances, advocacy, and resulting lawsuits have led to some actual improvements. And I'm also thinking about the medical arena. Surely you would think that the Texas Medical Association, for example, would have some interest in trying to maintain quality of care in the prison system, or they have a Texas Board of Medical Examiners. You know, a lot is delegated, I know, in prisons. It's way more than there is outside. But someone must be ultimately accountable for medical errors or neglect or lack of treatment, I would think. I don't think the prisons are exempt from the Texas State Board of Examiners, or are they?
They are a world unto themselves. I will say this. University of Texas Medical Center in Galveston does an excellent job when the inmates are taken to the hospitals there. They are treated as humans, as citizens, but then as they go back, that's where things fall apart because TDC doesn't have to follow anything. Those scripts are given. We don't have that medicine. You don't need that. They have taken away canes from people who need to walk, and they have taken away, one of my guys is blind, and he wears these big telescopic things. You can only go once a year to have your eyes examined. Every time he changes unit, they take the glasses, so he is blind again the next time. But that has nothing to do with University of Texas Medical Center, which recommended that he have these. And I will say this also. They transport patients in vans. By the way, if you could be a little bird looking down in Texas, you would see all these prison vans going all the time, transferring inmates. But they transfer them in vans with a metal bench all the way around. They shackle them to the floor and then handcuff them to each other. Doesn't work out real well in Rex, by the way, which seems to be happening once or twice a year now. If you've just had an operation, that's the van you're still in. They're supposed to be medical vans, but they never have them available. So a person who's just had an open operation is in that van on that medical ledge and then taken into a prison that in many cases has roaches and is filthy, and so they get additional infection. But that's inside the system, and we can't get in there. I would love for somebody to have an open records for the so-called medical providers and find out what their actual level of expertise is. Because one of my inmates is having bladder problems. Galveston helped him. When he came back, the medical provider gave him one catheter for each day. He's supposed to have 5. And she said, just take it and reuse it. Yeah. And the other question you asked was about
successful outcomes.
Successful outcomes. Thank you. I had my fingers crossed. It has taken since 1960-something for California to finally do something about it. AGSEG, that is lockdown in the hole. What's the more terms for it? Isolation. We had on any day 6,000 inmates in the Texas prison system are in AGSEG on any day, period. That's just an average. In California, they have men who are in AGSEG for 45 years. 45. So 6 of them got together for a class action lawsuit. It has been horrendous trying to get that to happen. But it's finally happened. And the prison system is saying it costs too much money to get them out. But I think that has happened. And now more people are looking at AGSEG for juveniles. We passed a law this last session that you can't, and President Obama mentioned it, and the Supreme Court mentioned it, that you can't have juveniles in AGSEG because their brains haven't developed and it really upsets their brain system. Yeah. So that's one. There are a few others where there has been some success in moving the prison system forward. But they can stand back and say, no, for security reasons we can't do that, and the courts absolutely defer to that. Yeah. You can't have Huckleberry Finn in the prison in Texas.
First of all, will Polonsky take your books? Will
Yes.
they distribute your books?
Yes.
From
So
Amazon?
I have a rousing set of correspondence from Polonsky.
Good. I visit with the 9 prisoners at Polonsky. And I have a suggestion. If there were pressure put on the committees that their members are required to go and visit prisoners, corrections committee, criminal jurisprudence, and criminal justice. If they were required to visit a TDCJ prison and a county prison and maybe even a city jail, required to do that before they passed laws affecting these prisoners.
Wouldn't that be something? I can just see the legislators right now scooting away from that committee assignment. Right? But if you could get them back into the committee, the only way that would work would be unannounced spot inspections. I don't mind the announced ones because the rooms get cleaned up. They clean up the kitchens and whatnot, so that's good in the long run. But the only way you could have that work is if they were allowed to just drop down. And then I think things might change, you're right.
Sounds similar to the nursing home scenario, so the unannounced inspections, that's a very good idea.
Right. Were they a closed society too before that?
Not to the extent that you're talking about with prisons. I think the Attorney General's office was in charge of nursing homes at least a number of years ago, and the Texas Health Department issues licenses and does inspections also. Well, yes, you have another point.
I have one other thought to leave you with. I believe this. I believe that every one of us is better than the worst thing we ever did. These citizens did something the worst thing they ever did, and they are paying for it. But I believe that they are better than that crime, and that we need to remember the better part of them.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Let's hope it spurs us to action along these lines. There's so many volunteer opportunities available, I would think.
Indeed.
Thank you again, Dr. LeClercq.